Well, by Thursday, gosh, everybody knows each other so well, you don't need any introductions. But I'm delighted to be moderating Jon Mills' talk this morning. Jon and I have been friends for over 20 years? I can't really go into all the stuff that Jon has accomplished in his career. I can't keep track of how many books he's published, how many awards he's gotten, accolades. He's really quite a phenomenal scholar, thinker, author, teacher. And one of the wonderful benefits of COVID, where the world went to Zoom, is this opportunity to start the new school for existential psychoanalysis, which is all virtual. So for the first time, Jon and I are able to be colleagues and work together on this wonderful project. It's Jon, Doug Kersner, and James and I who really run the program and do the bulk of the teaching. And we came up with this idea ourselves, and we're starting our second year. And of course this morning you'll be hearing from not only Jon, but of course Michael Montgomery, Nina, and so on to flesh out our week together. So that's been a real gift. Of course, Doug is in Australia. Doug, for God, I can't count how many years. But never before have we all been able to be involved in a joint project and working on a regular basis and meeting. So that's just fantastic. That's a real gift. And of course, this meeting at Esalen is the first time we've had an opportunity to all get together. Michael and Nina, David McBride couldn't be here, but the three of them started the training last year, and now they're entering their second year. But this is the first time we've been able to actually get together and hang out together and have some fun, which is what Esalen's all about. So Jon, are you still talking about Transcendence, or did you choose your different topic?
Yes, it's related.
Okay. All right, I'll just get out of the way. Thanks, Jon. Take it away.
Well, in reflecting on the theme of the conference about what is healing, I thought I'd present something that I usually, it's kind of new for me to present this kind of material. But I definitely feel it's heartfelt, and it's something that I personally am in search of myself. So I hope others can relate to the topic. I fundamentally believe that deep down, all people with qualifications are ultimately in search of peace, love, happiness, harmony, fulfillment, and a penetrating feeling of purpose and connection to something in life, even if amorphous or ill-defined. Although we may never know what that is in any tangible sense or how to find it. This pull or attraction often comes from an inner desire or voice, as muted and opaque as that might be. What we may refer to as an unconscious call or summons from the beautiful soul, the best part of us, looking to accomplish its ideals. Our psychological symptoms, and every human being has them, as internal dynamic conflicts or compromises, are thwarted or failed expressions of these encumbered strivings that may or may not be known to those who pine or suffer. The growing awareness of this need, let alone the striving itself, is emotionally noteworthy and often leads to a shift in one's reflective function and impetus to seek out greater or more noble inner experiences by encountering and crafting life in more meaningful ways. This impetus has been generally referred to by humanistic psychologists as a process of self-actualization, what Jung calls individuation. This complex endeavor, which is based on an internal longing, motivation, or compulsion, sometimes brought about by life events that precipitated inner awakening or revelation of self-reflection, to deepen and expand one's core being, such as one's emotional resonance states and their expression, or to develop a deliberate cognitive state of mindfulness toward self, other, and world, and to enhance moral, aesthetic, and spiritual value, is what we may signify as the pursuit of the numinous. There are many different forms of numinosity, from the non-rational sensus numinous that has historically been elaborated within religious studies and its interface with mysticism, to our psychological encounters with natural phenomena. The meaning, depth, and scope of numinous experience are contested among scholarly circles, hence emphasizing many variants in content, form, and typology. But they often refer to affections that are deemed beautiful, ecstatic, moving, intoxicating, magnificent, splendid, inspirational, and so forth. Some varieties illuminate the value of lived experience while bracketing metaphysical claims, while others point toward a transcendent realm of union with an absolute reality that may champion both philosophical and theological tenets. Although I believe numinous experience is itself a form of spiritual authenticity, we do not need to get bogged down in debate over its metaphysical origins in order to appreciate the psychological functions it serves and the qualitative value it brings. It may be generally said that our encounter with the numinous often involves a form of unitive experience with the collective, namely a greater feeling of unity or connectedness to humanity and cosmos as a whole. We may view this experience solely from the vantage point of naturalized psychology or human phenomenology, without importing ontotheology, and it is from this perspective that the secular quest for spirituality is often initiated. Where does this leave us? If we view self-actualization as a burgeoning process of becoming, a journey, not a destination, then each person is their own microcosm, transpiring within the internalized psychosocial matrix in which we are situated. In other words, we are our own becoming and fashion our own actualization experiences. Some scholars argue that unitive phenomena involve an underlying mystical union of incorporation and inclusion that all people possess. But we may differentiate between autosuggestion, self-deification, and pathological instantiations, although others adopt a favorable position grounded in negative theology, the via negativa, while remaining faithful in explicating naturalized accounts of mysticism without venturing into metaphysical waters. But regardless of such caveats, we cannot avoid making metaphysical commitments. Here the presence of the unio mystica employs its own divinity principle, since the contents, affects, and relational intensities produced are radically subjective and private, hence psychical. What anchors unitive thinking in this tendency toward incorporation, linking, synthesis, integration, and unification is, I suggest, that human consciousness is, at least in part, oriented toward transcendental acts of processing perceptual and fantasized events through a priori cognitive faculties, hence modes of thinking and emoting that are largely unconscious. And part of unitive experience is the feeling of the transcendental, our psychic positioning toward meaningful value, even though we may argue there is no definitive transcendent other than that which is conceived through human ideation. The spiritual quest is ultimately personal and solitary, although it often includes others by necessity, in forms of relatedness and communion that are deeply intimate and psychologically rewarding. Yet this aesthetic supplement is secondary to the internal work of the soul in dialogue with itself. Some examples of what we may rightfully call transcendence is experienced as the communion or unity of consciousness with nature, the felt mystical loss of self and otherness as a merged totality, such as an oceanic feeling, the joy of relationality with other human beings, such as in love or in close friendships, ethical self-consciousness, aesthetic sublimity, or any other numinous events available to human experience. Whether we attain such a lofty prize is immaterial, for it's the search that matters. When you give yourself over to the emotional moment as a psychic act of surrender, which is no different than true dispositions of religious faith, you suspend the sense of concern about other judgments and clinch the experience itself as a fusion of self with cosmos, or in more mystical, metaphysical language, as one absolute reality that lacks divisibility. Here, time consciousness is phenomenologically bracketed in this experiential mode of transcendence, even if it merely corresponds to our mental life. There is a certain uncertainty and obscurity in initiating this task, as one cannot simply go out and purchase this ready-made commodity, for it must be renovated continuously, sometimes contemplated while other times stumbled upon experimentally, or spontaneously enacted out of our unconscious creative potencies. While the variety of spiritual experiences generate various psychic conundrums, they are often spurred and inspired, whether consciously realized or not, by our being in relation to finitude, namely our being toward death. Although Newman historically refers to a divinity principle derived from Roman cult philosophy, which Cicero emphasized as an active power, a living force, or a presence underlying events in the world, as well as Virgil, who used the plural when he referred to prayer to the gods, the Magna Numina Precari. It was the German theologian Rudolf Otto who popularized the term in 1917 in his book Das Heilige, which was later translated as the idea of the holy. Otto articulates many elements of the sensus numinus that comprises a hybrid composition of spiritual experience, at once encompassing fear, affective intensity, urgency, and sublimity that results in appreciation of the sacred. numinous experience involves a mysterium tremendum, which is the fear and trembling associated with one's encounter with the mysterious. Here there's an element of anxiety and danger associated to it, one that produces a heightened sense of awareness and emotional exigency. On one hand, there is a sensation of awe, yet on the other, there is the appreciation of awfulness based on a qualitative state of feeling a mighty overpoweringness that envelops the psyche, which leads to an intensity in energies that produces an emotional immediacy. This further generates a feeling of the fascinans, which is a potent attraction or fascination that compels the subject toward the numinous object. This mysterium further engenders a qualitative inner experience that is personalized, whereby the subject stands in relation to and communion with a holy other. This nuanced elements of spiritual experience are imbued with an exalted sense of valuation that may be attributed to a variety of beliefs in divination and the holy, or as aesthetic experience expressed indirectly and in art. Otto's portrayal of the numinous not only weds human emotion to a category of valuation, hence a moral enterprise, but also a category of the beautiful as a harmonious symmetry to spiritual experience. What he articulates as holy or sacred is not simply that which is completely good, as an absolute moral attribute of supreme value, but rather that which has an overplus of meaning. Here he suggests that Numen is beyond goodness, for it's a higher instantiation of spirit. But are we justified, I believe, in saying that there is a parallel process that works to integrate both the moral and aesthetic unity, which is a catalyst for the surplus of meaning to occur? Although Otto qualifies the numinous as something non-rational, this does not mean to imply it's irrational, nor can we conclude that it's not subject to logical analysis. In fact, the blending of sense and feeling with the good and the beautiful, which generates a plethora of meaning, not only makes the numinous a rational phenomenon, it becomes an axiological ideal. As both a category of valuation and a psychological state of mind, Otto attempts to describe a form of spiritual intuition that must be evoked or awakened from within each individual through their own natural path of understanding. For numinous consciousness defies strict definition and may be more properly described as ineffable. Here we may conclude that this attitude toward the numinous is mystical. Although this sensibility is roused from within, he insists there is a numen presens that is felt as objectively real and outside the self, despite the fact that we cannot grant it independence from consciousness, a point William James makes when he refers to a numinous object that has a sense of reality and a feeling of objective presence that is given as a datum of consciousness. The tremendum element of the numinous is unique to most descriptions of transcendence because of the negative emotions it entails. This is distinct from the positive affect attributed to the feeling sensations of sublimity, joy, or ecstasy. However, Otto warns us not to equate this dread or trembling with the ordinary emotion of fear, for it is quite a specific kind of emotional response, wholly distinct from that of being afraid, albeit analogous to it. This is partly due to our creature feeling in relation to an all-powerful majestus that leaves us exposed in our insignificance and humility. The ideogram Mysterium Tremendum therefore captures the awful majesty of this induced emotional state. The form of the mysterious, in addition to evoking the feeling of a tremenda majestis, also produces a seductive facet of attraction or fascination with the numinous object. We may say this is the point of the Hegelian Aufhebung, where fear is surpassed yet subsumed into a new higher order within a positive polarity. As with Kant, James, and Dewey, the emotional quality of the lived experience confers a particular form of valuation that Otto identifies as numinous, what traditionally has been relegated to the sphere of religion. Today we may opt for the term spiritual as a neutral way of expressing our experience of transcendental consciousness, devoid of religious doctrine, although, as stated earlier, we may rightfully conclude that numinous experience lies at the heart of any form of religiosity and essentially shares the same set of emotive and valuational properties belonging to secular spiritual sensibility. Although Otto wishes to make the numinous an a priori category of the holy, that is, an inborn capacity to receive and understand spirit, what is akin to a sensus divinitatis, we may part company with his analysis here. When I speak of the numinous, I'm referring to a sensation of consciousness that is wholly independent of any association to a divinity principle or supernatural presence sustaining these spiritual events. Rather, I'm speaking of the exaltation of human emotion as a refined awareness and expansion of consciousness that yokes together what the experiential subject deems to be innately good or of unequivocal value with the self-certain truth and revered beauty of its occurrence, which results in an esoteric and deeply personalized meaning that cannot be generalized to others precisely because this private experience is totally relativized. Here we're not concerned with an extant ontological divine object that exists independent of mind. Rather, we're only concerned with the metaphysics of experience. To illustrate this point, I'll draw on my own personal experience of the numinous that has stuck with me ever since it occurred. I was traveling on a plane through turbulent weather, which persisted for almost the entire last leg of the flight, to visit my closest friend in the United States, when suddenly the plane began to dive. There was a silent pandemonium that enveloped the passengers. Then in rapid contagion, people began to scream as our cortisol levels just skyrocketed. Jeez. This always makes me weep. I don't know if I'm going to get through this. Okay. So, as I recall, the immeasurable anxiety and the trepidation that gripped us all, there was an emotional rush and imperceptible certainty that death was impending. a sudden a sequential profusion of images flashed before the theater of my mind as if they were emanating from an old-time film projector, except for they were in color. What initially appeared to me in sublime vision was my wife's face, followed by the face of my children in order of their birth, each smiling at me with love and in full acceptance. This instantly produced a majestic sense of calm over me as the pilot commandeered the plane back to safety. As you can see, the joy induced by recollecting this event still makes me weep to this day. I would describe this event as an example of the Mysterium Tremendum due to its limit situation and the emotional meaning it generated. Here I'm not making an ontological leap of faith or attributing a metaphysical realism to this numinous state of bliss, only that the phenomenology of my ordeal had an elevating consequence on my consciousness. Now, in retrospect, the surplus meaning Otto highlights is likely due to the fact that it was so unique in my life. Whereas a feeling of survival had triumphed over my mortal fear of death, that it could not escape such a glorious classification bestowed by elation. If we were to rationally study such occurrences in people under controlled scientific experiments, we would likely conclude that these spiritual events are purely psychological. But that is precisely my point. All human experience is essentially mental. Every embodied psychic event, including all physiological and neural activity, is mediated by mind. It does not matter if spiritus objectively originates from within our minds rather than a divine supernatural realm, for what truly matters is the extraordinary nature of the lived affective experience itself that takes hold of a person and awakens another realm of suprasensibility. In this example, we may see how my cherished values and relational attachment to my family unconsciously materialized in this point of crisis, which was colored by aesthetic and valuational properties that neutralized my panic and elevated my fright to a state of spiritual transcendence. In this encounter with finitude, the core of what is most important to me disclosed itself as an unconditional love symbolized through the unconscious representation of the magos. It does not matter one bit what overdetermined factors were at play, only that the experience was meaningful to me. Here we must concede that spirituality is radically subjective and relative, our own private fumbling toward ecstasy. Whether unconsciously orchestrated or consciously chosen, the quest for holism becomes much more of a pressing need as you get older and more cognizant of your impending mortality. Our being toward death is perhaps the most intimate of all experiential encounters, for only I can live my own death. There's no stand-in to take my place, no anonymous other. We must live it alone. Despite the fact that mortality is a universal occurrence for all sentient beings, no one else can die for me. This is what makes it completely solitary, inimitable, and exclusive. In the hovering moments of finality, we are all a one-man show. I want to live my life as fullest as I can. And that means in innermost closeness and sobriety to my own death. No one wants termination, the end of experience. That is why embracing our impending transience adds more value to the moment and helps us prepare for death. In the end, I want to be able to say I had a good life, and I made the most of it the best way I could. To be honest with ourselves, free of blind ignorance and self-deception, to open ourselves up to the affective interiority of our beings, to experience genuine emotion and spontaneity, to love, work, and play, to tolerate ambiguity through the courage to be, to have compassion and empathy for others' suffering as well as our own, to contemplate the numinous and follow a moral path, and to be committed to becoming a decent human being. What else can we reasonably ask for? We're the authors of our own lives, to be lived and relived. Despite our passions, fallibility, and finite natures, we have no other recourse than to accept our thrownness with humility. We call this humanism. The I that is we, and the we that is I. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, John, for such a moving talk. I think we're all touched by that. So, questions, comments?
That was beautiful, John. It's like poetry and very heartfelt. It was also fascinating because I know, if you don't mind me saying, you're an atheist, but at times there was like just a touch there of something. But then I thought, do you think ever in terms of the non-dual?
What do you mean by the non-dual?
That's all I can say about the non-dual.
Non-dual or
Dual?
Not. It's my accent.
Dual. Dual.
Dual.
Duality.
Oh.
Non-duality. Thank you.
Non-jewelry.
Get by with a little help from my friends.
I think we're all up a little bit late last night.
Non-duality.
Well, it's obviously a very difficult question, given that no one's been able to resolve it. The question is, how do you account for multiplicity within some kind of unitary structure? Let's say, whether it be our psyche or whether it be the cosmos itself. I obviously cannot resolve it. At times, there does seem to be some kind of access or porthole to experiences that one dissolves into this unity. I personally really haven't felt it. Because that would mean I would have to suspend my agency and sense of self and allow it to dissolve. So I know that others who practice meditation and other spiritual practices claim to achieve certain states of consciousness that either broach or embrace that. It's Also, though, it's a fascinating philosophical question. How can there be only one? Meaning solitarity. This is the dilemma of Neoplatonism, because that means there is no division, there is no multiplicity, and that's what we experience every day, is plurality in all spheres of life. Yet do we participate in this oneness? I'm going to have to leave that to others. And I think maybe given the question you asked, and given that we're all unique individuals with our own psychic microcosm, that means some of you may achieve that and believe that. So I'm not going to rule it out.
Thank you, John. That was beautiful and very moving. So I had an experience when I was 21 with a psychedelic outside at night, laying on a hilltop out in the country where I could see a gazillion stars. And I had an experience of that dissolving. And I felt like I was just expanding into the cosmos and into all those stars. And I had this knowing, and a personal knowing, that this is what happens when I die. And that experience has stuck with me my whole life, and I've been a meditator now for over 50 years, and I don't experience that in my meditation, but I can still access it from that experience when I was 21.
Yeah, well, beautiful. It reminds me of your husband's talk yesterday, because he asked us to focus on a dream, and if I might indulge response. So Sandy talked about a big dream. So my big dream that sticks in my consciousness more than anything, I think, is that I had a dream that I was working on a huge piece of wood, like the size of that wall, and I was an artist, and I was using Dremel tools, and I was creating a spiral, and so I had when I woke up, that was a summons that I needed to do something about that. And so I started painting, and I started doing art and sculpture, and I went through a little bit of a productive period for my own amusement. And I was working on something, obviously, working something out. And when Sandy used the imagery to focus on that, and where did it take it? What's the next image? Excuse me. What came into mind was I think it's called, is it an amethyst? What is the prehistoric kind of shell that used to, be
Ammonite?
That's it. An ammonite that was cut in half, and you could see all the intricacies of it. It was spiraling in, and I kept going deeper, 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 until there was just a pinhead of light. And then my imagination or consciousness, whatever you want to call it, it's spontaneous. We're supposed to spontaneously allow it to just emerge. It just slowly kind of came out like almost like a camera that's going back, and it all became gradually black. And so I said, well, that's death, and that's where I'm going to go. I'm going to merge with the cosmos there. And then he says, well, then focus back on something that stands out. So I wanted to go back to that pinhead of light. I'm not ready to go yet. So that's about as close as I can say that there must be some unification experience that we might end up in. So thanks for sharing.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for your talk, John. I really appreciate it. We were talking a little bit, it was lunch or dinner the other day, and I mentioned that I consider myself to be a spiritual atheist, and I think your talk really encapsulated how I think about that. Because for me, that means maintaining a sense of awe and not fighting reality, accepting what is, trying not to get stuck in resentment, which I think that's very similar to what you were talking about with working with your thrownness. So it just was really cool. I just wanted to say that I felt very aligned with your talk, so thank you.
Thanks, Colin.
I don't have to make you walk all the way over. I can be loud.
I'm getting my workout this morning. Yeah, it's what I needed.
Not good to make an old man work too hard, Did
What old man?
Yeah, that's true. I wondered, John. Thank you. I moved me that you had that experience going through that. Thank you for sharing that. I was wondering. I assume you're familiar with Levinas and his work on totality and infinity and other stuff. How would you relate that to your reflections on Otto's work, and also Max Shaler and his work where he defines the sphere of the holy that as a lived experience? And you're familiar with that too, I assume.
Honestly, I'm not. Yeah, and my understanding of Levinas is quite limited as well. It's his philosophy is rather foreign to me, though, because everything is to give oneself up to the other, and that doesn't really resonate with me. Why would I value the other more than me? It would only be on the symbolic sense that the other is an embodiment of humanity, and in that sense, the I that is we. And so in an abstract sense, I can appreciate very much why we need to be ethical to otherness. Is that spirit? Yes, it's spiritual. In fact, wouldn't we say that if we can't access a moral sensibility of mutually recognizing others as also a reflection of ourself, as the famous Hegelian move, it makes our ethical relation to humanity the most important thing. So in that sense, if that answers your question.
Well, I thought you captured what Levinas was addressing. I would agree with you, but I think what you got from it is exactly what you're embedded in the nexus of the world inevitably, and your moving commentary about your experience on the plane and what came to you, it's your family. And that was, you weren't thinking about politics, or, your relationship to God, or having this where you live. And I think that most of us operate in that very personal realm frequently when it comes to these things. And I think a lot of the, I've always been fascinated with the Buddhist psychology and, the Upanishads, the Gita, and I love that kind of stuff, right? And, but the bottom line is, if you stub your toe, you say, ouch. So, it's like, that's all wonderful philosophy, and then you're confronted with the bullshit of life, and then you say, well, how spiritual are you? When you're saying, fuck off to that driver that just cut you off. Anyway, thanks, John, very much.
Well, that's spiritus.
Yes.
Speaking loudly. Thank you.
All right, I'll have to keep track of Gary here next.
Yeah, thank you, John. That was that's such a strong and welcome to just hear you share something deeply so personal. So thank you for that. And also I think it's extremely powerful to combine a complex philosophical, psychological statement with a vivid, evocative, personal memory that moves you so deeply. So that's extremely useful as a learning experience to work with that. And I guess I was reflecting on how striking it is to imagine you in the plane and everyone is screaming around you. And tell me, interrupt me if it's not okay to talk about this, but everyone is screaming around you, and then you have these images, visions, and then this peace comes over you. And it was, for me, it's either the synchronicity of the peace coming over you as the plane kind of reestablishes itself, or the peace coming over you while everybody's screaming. And either I wasn't sure exactly what happened, or maybe you're not sure even what happened, but just both of those possibilities seem really, it's just very, very memorable. I'm gonna remember that probably this is a very memorable talk. So I'm curious about that, when that moment of peace happened.
I think in retrospect, it probably happened before we, got the plane back. So I think in my mind, if I die, at least I, got them with me.
Thank you.
I as well was most taken by the moment of your feelings erupting. And you even predicted it in your paper. And it reminds me of a time that I was giving a lecture on healing to a bunch of MFT trainees, and all of a sudden I burst into sobbing in front of everybody, couldn't control it. And so I was really with you in that moment of trying to give a lecture, but also trying to deal with your feeling. And so as I looked at it, your paper said it was something about tears of joy, which I think is a fascinating emotion. But as I saw it, I had a number of thoughts. I thought, well, there's something not complete about this experience because it's coming up again. There's a part I saw, and I'm fully aware I'm not in your body, so I don't know what's happening, that looked like grief and sadness. Some part of it looked like fear. And so I wonder if you can say more about the feeling that you keep repeating, predicted you were going to repeat, and had it again, because on some level it seemed that you contained it to be able to keep going. Yeah. And so I'm curious about if that whole weed was pulled up, all the clumps of dirt that would be stuck to the roots of it, and have you explored that more? And very curious.
I guess I certainly have reflected on it. Every time I do reflect on it, I still find it sacred, and I don't know if it can just be kind of analyzed away. And I don't think I want it to be. It's like it's okay if it's raw, and there's some grief or sadness that you saw in it, yeah, that's, I think, maybe part of the tremendum. There's that sense of urgency and fear and awe, and it's precious. I want to keep it, and if the affect goes away, it almost seems like the specialness of it will go away. So maybe that's one reason why I don't want to just analyze it away. I just want to keep it close to my heart. Yeah. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that have near-death experiences describe it as a life-changing event. Maybe more passionate about life than ever before. Was that your experience?
Maybe it's all related. It's all related to a sense of urgency about our time is, limited here, and I definitely feel like I'm in probably the last season of my life. Hope not, but who knows? And there is a great sense of urgency for me to finish my life project. And that is, I want to do everything from, write tons of more books, because I have them in my head, to enjoying the rest of my time here in my family and friends and colleagues and my music and art, and it's just, as long as I have good health, I'm going to keep the passion going.
Yeah, we discovered last night that Jon is actually Neil Young. Yeah. Anybody else? Comments? Questions? Epiphanies? Oh. Yeah.
Thank you. I actually had a dream, not a real life experience, a lived experience, but I had a very big dream that was very similar to this. The plane was going down in this dream, and it was a very big dream, and the oxygen masks released, and I was in this whole process around having this conversation with myself that at least I was a good person, and then there was this voice saying, well, it doesn't really matter if you were a good person or not. Were you happy? It's like, well, what do you mean, was I happy? What would make me more happy? And so I kind of went through this whole reflection, this very short but powerful dream. And it prompted me to actually move from Hawaii to Utah across the big waters in a very short period of time to be closer to my daughter and granddaughter. So it upended my life. I changed my work, I sold my belongings and moved. And it's big energy.
Yeah.
The plane is going down. So thank you. It reminded me of that.
Well, how powerful that is too, that you would change your life.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be happy before you go.
Yeah.
That's all that matters.
The richness of happiness, not that sort of, surfacey, but like a depth of what really matters. Yeah. So thank you.
Thanks for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Lovely, thank you. Just wanted to share, my mother and I used to see eagles together, and hawks, and she was really key in developing my relationship to nature. So when she got cancer, we were driving from central Arkansas to Memphis for her chemo across the Mississippi Delta in the winter. and there were massive amounts of Canadian snow geese in migration. And they were like this, you know, in V's, and it was like the sky was latticed, but they were almost like smoke. And then they would fly over, and she had macular degeneration, so she couldn't see them. And I just kept exclaiming, you know, Mother, the geese, and, you know, and she was kind of getting a little frustrated. So I saw a big flock fly over, and I was like, you know, we also had chased murmurs coming through Conway, Arkansas. We got in our car, and she was driving, I was standing up in the sunroof. I mean, just, I think they were starlings, but mass, like a black, inky cloud over our heads, and then on and on and on and on. And so we pulled off the freeway, got on a side road, an access road, and they were coming in. And so she was like, well, I'm having a little trouble seeing them still. And they were trying to land in a rice field. Wasn't water. They didn't know. And as they all touched down, they began self-organizing into a spiral. Touch down and come up. Touch down. They were like, well, we've got to come up. And this bird tornado appeared before my mother and myself. And then it disappeared. And that year, I had a friend who had something she did called theme work, which was you choose a word that's a metaphor at the beginning of the year, and then you see how your embeddedness in your life, you know, it's sort of like an exercise in synchronicity, but it's more like about an exercise of being in the world. And my theme was conversation, and my image was spiral. So I wanted to share that with you.
Thanks,
I think you're being moved when you are talking about that experience is beautiful. And I would not want to lose that if I were you. And I just think that it's a wonderful testament to who you are.
And a gift to the audience.
Thank you, Jon. I'm thinking about when you are connected to the one, to everything together, oneness, the Dionysian experience maybe, together the oceanic feeling, where there is no individual. So I connected most with the unconscious, not with the conscious. So I was wondering if you would see the door that connects the unconscious and the conscious, a need to be expanded so we can be more conscious of the unconscious. Something about this that I'm thinking about. Yeah, because I'm thinking when you talk about your experience, near that experience, and there's a conscious, you see your family, and would there be something in the unconscious happening? I was wondering about this, and then, or that what you had in your mind, the conscious was the unconscious coming. Yeah, thank you very much.
Estrella, that you made me think that if consciousness is the manifestation of the unconscious, as even from a logical standpoint, we just don't, consciousness just doesn't pop up ex nihilo, has to be prepared, that whatever unconscious preparation, whatever processes, mechanisms, etc. you want to call it, would it wouldn't it mean that we're going to, if we emerge from the unconscious, wouldn't we return to the unconscious? And so maybe that is a good metaphor for what, death is. We certainly will be unconscious.
As far as we know. One of the things I like about Heidegger and his whole philosophy is about death and living your death. And he thought that we're always looking for some certainty. If you go to heaven, there's a reincarnation, or there's nothing, there's an abyss, it's over. And he says, in reality, we don't know and cannot know what happens when we die. And that's what's beautiful about it. It's a mystery that we live with that all the time and resist that certitude, to have the final answer about it. When you talk, maybe think about that. Anybody else? Sure.
Can we leave?
And then Nick.
No, just a question to what you're saying. How much can we live with the uncertainty? I cannot very easily live with uncertainty. Yeah.
Well, that is the thrust of existentialism. That's what it's about, is that life is ambiguous. We don't have any answers. And we live with that and make that magical instead of frustrating.
I thought that was a really phenomenal journey into the cave of your mind. And the thing that I most appreciated was the sincerity of your spirit. It started off quite dense, heady, poetic, but then you got really real. And we fell in love with your soul and how much you loved your wife and your kids. To your point, never lose that. Because for the rest of our lives, we'll remember this moment. And that pure, visceral emotion, that's what captivated us, not your brilliant philosophies. That was helpful. But I was really touched by that. You're a very gifted storyteller. I think all of us felt this electricity buzzing through our bodies because you painted the picture of what it was to be on that flight and have your life flash before your eyes. And I would encourage you to share this recording widely in your community because I think the world would benefit.
Well, thanks for your gift. Appreciate that.
It puts me in mind of that famous philosopher Mike Tyson, who said everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah, good old Mike Tyson.
When my father was dying in Monterey, my mother and he had been driving down the coast from a ceremony in which I was a major participant. And they had come from Arizona to be there. And my father had leukemia. And he had gone to his doctor, and his doctor had said, okay. My mother, of course, thought this was not a great idea, but my father said, we're going. And they drove. And when they drove down the coast, my father decided he wanted to walk on his favorite campus, which was Stanford. And they had quite a fight about it. And my mother said, I'm so glad your father won that fight. And he walked on campus. Because when they got to Monterey, my father was having difficulty breathing and was hospitalized. And I was in New York, performing the marriage of two close friends and flew back, and there was a little note, a little card from my father when I got home, and I immediately called a friend who took me to the airport and flew down to Monterey. And my father loved music. He had perfect pitch and played the violin when he was 4. And so my mother and I went into town to get some music. And the hospital came up with a player. It was cassettes back then. And I played him Beethoven's Violin Concerto, which was something he wanted to hear. And I played one side, and then I played the other side. And then my father said, play the other side, the second side. And I said, well, Dad, I did. And my mother said, oh, Margaret, you don't understand. Your father has never thought that Beethoven properly resolved that concerto. He wants to hear it again. And so we heard it again. And then I asked my father, when it was finished, did he want me to play the Schubert? And he said, no, it's enough. It's enough. And then he began to breathe more and more slowly. And we were holding him. And I asked my mother if she wanted time alone, and she said yes. So I left the room. And then she came to get me and said, you need to come right now, because he's leaving. So I was there when he left. And after he left, and went wherever he went in the cosmos, which I do not have an answer to, but what I imagined is, Beethoven, wherever you are, my father is headed for you, and it's going to be quite a conversation. And that's how I think of him. Is that somewhere he and Beethoven are holding this conversation.
Beautiful, thank you.
Thanks, Meg. It's beautiful. So maybe we should wrap it up. Yeah? John, thank you a million. That was wonderful.